Well, hello and welcome to everyone joining us for this X-Talks webinar. Today's talk is entitled Patient-Centric Research, How Optimized Trials Enhance Patient Enrollment, Retention, and More. My name is Corey Stanton, and I'll be your X-Talks host for this event. Today's presentation runs for approximately 60 minutes, and the webinar includes an interactive Q&A session with our speakers. To make the most of this session, feel free to submit questions and comments for our speakers throughout the presentation using the questions chat box, and we'll try to attend to as many as possible. This chat box is located in the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen, and if you require any assistance, please don't hesitate to contact me by sending a message using this very same chat box. I'd also like to welcome our attendees viewing this presentation from our LinkedIn live event, and I encourage you to submit questions as well via the comments tab. Please note that all participants are in listen-only mode and that this event will be recorded and made available for streaming for those who registered on xtalks.com. At this point, I'd like to thank Elligo Health Research, who developed the content for this presentation. Elligo Health Research accelerates clinical trials through EHR data, their proprietary Elligo technology, and direct access to known, diverse patients. From more than 115 hospitals and major health systems, 200 healthcare-based sites, and 100 research-based sites. Elligo's Patient Select model engages their network of networks to optimize the intersection of healthcare and research and bring more patients clinical research as a care option. And their Site Select model and research partner services enable sites to seamlessly participate in trials, further advancing the development of new pharmaceutical, biotechnology, and medical device and diagnostic procedures. Now, let's take a moment to meet our panelists. One of our speakers today is Barry Sims. With over 22 years in clinical research and pharmaceutical services, Barry Sims, CEO of Elligo Health Research, advances novel therapeutics through expert leadership. He oversees large-scale operations, including project management, clinical kitting, accessioning, and biorepository for companies with over 700 employees. His business development proficiency is shown in high growth, private equity-owned organizations, global laboratory partnerships, and work enhancing operational efficiency, productivity, and consistency with private equity owners and boards of directors. And joining Barry today is Jacylyn Dougherty. Jackie has over 25 years of experience in product, technology, and digital transformation in life sciences. As Elligo's Chief Product Officer, she oversees product strategy and delivery for Elligo's tech-enabled service model. Driven by her passion for customer value and clinical trial transformation, she leads a team of product managers, engineers, UX designers, and support specialists to develop and improve Elligo's Elligo research stack and study marketplace technology. Also joining us today is Leslie Carney. Leslie Carney has over 20 years of consumer marketing, relationship management, and sales experience, having started in the nonprofit sector as a fundraiser before joining clinical research in 2017. Leslie joined Elligo in 2024 as Senior Director, Patient Solutions, and is leading the company's initiative to maximize internal resources, align with strategic partners where needed, and infuse patient centricity into Elligo's comprehensive efforts, engaging with patients and sites to accelerate enrollment. And finally, rounding out the panel today is Dr. Faith Holmes. Dr. Holmes brings over 30 years of patient care experience and 11 years in medical practice management to her role as Elligo's Chief Medical Officer. Her background in family medicine and hospice and palliative medicine across various practice settings enhances her ability to build Elligo's network of research-ready physician practices. Dr. Holmes has served as principal investigator on 15 optimized trials in the virtual and hybrid models, in addition to trials at the local site, Elligo Clinical Research Center in Austin. And now, without any further ado, I'd like to hand the mic over to our first speaker today, Barry Sims. Barry, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you, Corey, appreciate that. And you know, there's a saying that they have that good leaders surround themselves with people that are smarter than themselves. And I don't think it'll take everyone long today with the panelists that we have to really understand I'm a great leader and have surrounded myself with really competent leadership. So looking forward to the meeting today. On the agenda, a couple of things to point out is that we are with Leslie and Jackie and Dr. Holmes. We've been able to operate in a lot of different types of models. And so, you know, from a patient recruitment standpoint, you know, really understanding different models and different strategies that you can employ is going to be some good information that Leslie's going to share today. There's more technology offerings today than ever, you know, more considerations as how we implement tech in different types of clinical trials. Jackie's a great resource to be able to talk about how we've done this in the past and some challenges that you might face in the future. And with Dr. Holmes, not only is Dr. Holmes our Chief Medical Officer, she's also the principal investigator at our site in Austin. but has also been our centralized PI on running different types of models of trials. So, not only her overall medical experience, but her experience in running different models is going to be some valuable information. We also, and I know this has been mentioned, and we're going to follow up at the end, that we hosted an FDA audit on a trial with a centralized PI and satellite sites. So we're definitely going to share some information from that audit on what the regulatory agencies are looking for in running these trials, which will be some good information to share. So without further ado, let's kick off for our first poll question. I think we always need to get the terminology down, which is, I think in these trials has been a challenge. So I wanted to kick this off to Corey with our first poll question.
Yes, that's right. Thank you, Barry. We do have an interactive poll question for audience members to respond to in real time. If you're attending via GoToWebinar, the poll is appearing on your screen now, and you can vote on this question by clicking on any of the answers and hitting the submit button. For those of you watching via the LinkedIn Live event, please feel free to share your thoughts and answers in the comments section. The question we have for you today is, what is the current terminology you use for non-traditional trials? And your options are decentralized trials, or DCT, virtual or siteless, hybrid, optimized, or I am so confused, who knows? We'd like to just, again, get a sense of what the current terminology that you use for non-traditional trials. Those options are decentralized trials, DCT, virtual or siteless, hybrid, optimized, or I'm very confused, who knows? I'll leave the poll open a little while longer to allow the majority of the audience to get their votes in. I'm gonna go ahead and close it very, very shortly. So if you haven't voted yet, please go ahead and get your vote in. We'll give you about 5 more seconds, and then we'll go ahead and take a look at the results. Okay, gonna go ahead and close the poll now, and let's take a quick peek at how the chips fell on this one. So we had a majority here, 59% choose decentralized trials, DCT, 4% virtual or siteless, 26%, so our next highest number here for hybrid, 4% optimized, and 7% of you here today are very confused. Hopefully you leave less confused than you arrived. Barry, I'll send it back to you.
Yeah, and I think I would have answered, I'm so confused, I don't know. It's I know we've had a lot of different terms in decentralized and hybrid, but this is one that I really liked when I was at the Scope conference in February. Dr. Todd Everhart, who was with Signet, did a presentation on, just different terminologies, and what he utilized was optimized trials, which is really collecting the right data at the right time in the right setting with the right solution. And I like this because, in a sense, what we're seeing today is when you think about decentralized trials, that's focusing everything into what I would call a siteless or a virtual trial. And what we're finding is that there's more of a blend that we're seeing in the industry and in trial designs moving forward. There's a saying that if you're a hammer, everything's a nail. And that's one thing I like about the way we've been able to run trials at Elligo, which is what we're seeing in the industry, is that there's a time you need a blend, that there are truly things that need to be decentralized or virtual, and there's times that you need to utilize a site and a site network, and sometimes even on the same study, or to find different populations. So we're going to go through that today and really talk about some of those models and where those solutions might fall. If you'll do the next slide, I always like to start every presentation out, why listen to us? I mean, who is Elligo? And what are we bringing to this conversation that might be beneficial to you? Just wanted to go through that. In the last 4 years, we've ran 20 trials that I would consider to be hybrid virtual. Over 30,000 patients enrolled. We've ran diagnostic, interventional, observational studies across multiple indications. So a lot of different experience. And with that experience, we've seen things that have worked well. We've identified some areas that we have evolved over time to be more efficient and collaborative with sponsors as they're running studies, and we're going to try to really put some of that in front of you all today. Next slide. When you look at those trials that we've done, when I say completely virtual, where I would consider decentralized trials, we've done 5 of those where these are fully siteless, so truly centralized PI with just no sites involved. And then we've ran 15 studies that are different models having some level of site, where it's a centralized PI and sub-Is or satellite sites, and we've ran some different models there. And then there's other considerations, as I've mentioned at the bottom, with other things like patient recruitment strategies, how we're connecting to EHRs, patient travel services, things like that, that sometimes you need on these studies. So there's other considerations that we need to have as we go through. Did want to talk, but before I hand off, I want to do our second poll question, which is really to get an understanding of our audience, of your experience in running these types of trials. So I'll turn it back over to Corey for poll question number 2.
Yes, that's right. We do have our second of 3 polls for today. This time, the question we have for you is, what is your experience with these optimized trials? And we have 3 options for you. Option 1 being none. You simply only have experience with trials using traditional sites. Option 2, some experience with traditional sites that have incorporated some of these DCT elements, such as remote or virtual visits. Or option 3, you have experience conducting virtual trials which did not use traditional sites. And again, we just like to get a sense of who our audience is for the webinar here today and what your experience level is with these optimized trials. I'll run through those options for you one more time. Option 1, no experience. The only experience you have is with trials using using traditional sites. Some experience with traditional trials that have incorporated some DCT elements like remote or virtual visits. And finally, you do have experience conducting virtual trials which did not use traditional sites. I'll leave the poll open for about 10 more seconds to see if we can get a majority vote in from our audience. Got about 5 more seconds now to vote in if you haven't voted yet already. Looks like we do have a majority vote, so I'm going to go ahead and close the poll, and let's take a quick look at those results. Interesting division here this time, 39% saying no experience, only experience with traditional sites. 52% are small majority here, some experience with traditional trials that have incorporated DCT elements, and 9% are minority here saying that they have experience with virtual trials that did not use traditional sites. Barry, I'm going to send things back to you.
Not surprised by that answer. I think we've seen that a lot where, some elements has, not a lot of experience with folks running completely, virtual trials. So it's good to know. I think we can weave that into our answers as we move forward in presentations. So without further ado, I will hand it off to Leslie and Jackie to go through our recruitment and technology considerations.
Thank you. So we all have tools, strategies that we are available to us in our organizations, and we wanted to go through some of the nuance to how to deploy those tools in optimized settings. So the first that I wanted to call attention to is our direct to patient outreach. So important when planning decentralized trial is coordination, and ultimately our goal is to reduce burden on patients and the virtual study team. But sometimes in doing that, we end up asking more of the patients to be prepared for the study visits. So coordination around direct to patient outreach is important to know where is your access to your patient population and what is your central system, and will all of the partners that, whether the client is bringing a partner to the table, whether there's a retail pharmacy involved, whether there's a patient advocacy group that is providing access to patients, making sure that we have a streamlined system and process in place so that there is consistency for the patient experience, and trying to reduce the number of platforms that the virtual study team will need to engage with. Direct-to-patient outreach, and particularly through digital marketing and advertising, can also be an effective tool for increasing the diversity of our enrollment, and we'll speak to that in just another minute. So I was going to say, even, comfort with technology varies by person, and even those of us as panelists today, we did a prep call for this to make sure we knew how to use the system, knew where our buttons are. Our patients don't have that luxury in a virtual trial setting, and so central virtual study support is really important. Having a person that is available in real time in your current time zone, and who is well educated and prepared to address the range of questions that our patients might have in advance of their virtual visits is really important. And while we often plan for electronic communications, digital outreach, making sure to budget and allocate time appropriately for that personalized level of support has proven to be important and not to be neglected during your planning process. In addition to support retention, the virtual study team support can be really helpful. We know that we want to try and use electronic communications first and foremost. We're trying to be efficient, fast, meet patients where they are. But sometimes that's not the most effective strategy to reach them. And if there is follow-up required and we have had less engagement in the meantime, we might not see the response rate we're looking for. One example we used in a recent study was to be able to bring in the conversion rate of those completing their 6-month follow-up on an ECO assessment that was critical to the endpoint, but incorporating personal phone call reminders in addition to the text reminders that they were receiving, because we weren't seeing the completion rate that was required. So in general, just thinking through how the normal tools and all the strategies that we're using in an ongoing way in a traditional study design, how they can be deployed or thought about differently, try and help spark ideas for us in how to solve our collective challenges as we address these studies moving forward. And if you'd like to move to the next slide, we do have experience achieving diversity goals when they're set by the study or the client's needs, and also through our work as a company naturally with the patient populations and where our sites have been located. So for us, our most successful experience has been in the hybrid design model. We know from research in diversity and engagement and clinical trials that the relationship with the physician and that trusted relationship is really important and helps to ease anxiety within communities that have been underrepresented and not had transparency in the clinical trial process in the past. So what we're looking to do is be able to find a way to replicate that level of community and interactiveness with a virtual study team in order to build trust in the different types of diverse subpopulations that we're looking to enroll. So one recent experience that we had in a successful study that we have now closed is that about halfway through enrollment, the study pivoted to look to enroll only males that were older than we were currently seeking and males only instead of males and females. So at that point of time, we were able to quickly adapt our digital marketing efforts through imagery, through messaging, through how we were tailoring where we were placing the study ads in order to make a quick pivot and be able to continue enrolling in the population that was desired at that point in time. And we were, through expedited review processes, able to achieve that diversity goal and continue to enroll the patients that we were seeking in that study. In another project that we have ongoing, again, importance of digital campaigns and the flexibility that that provides you to be able to move quickly to adjust to in-flight considerations, is working with a recruitment strategic partner on a project and looking at interest groups to be able to find patients that are meeting a range of subpopulations and diversity that we are seeking for that project. So I think that's something, especially considering the poll response, that maybe not all of us have worked in a virtual trial setting yet, is to try to think about what works very well in person and how can we try to replicate that in an online virtual community, much like we have had to adapt and adjust to that in our work environments. How can we provide that for our patients and the range of patients that we're looking to enroll? If you'd like to move to the next slide, we have also compiled here a list of considerations. And while I won't go through them all now in the interest of time, our goal was to bring to the forefront of your mind some items that we have run into in the studies that we have run and collaborating with clients and partners on enrolling virtual or decentralized trials. And one that I wanted to call out in particular regarding recruitment and eligibility confirmation is medical records. So whether you're, no matter where you sit in our industry, I think during the planning process, very important to determine what level of documentation is going to be required. Can patients self-identify? Can they self-report? Is that sufficient? If that's not sufficient and we need medical record diagnosis confirmation, what degree of records are going to be required? What will the patient have to pull on their own first? Will they have to find the record and then upload it? Is prescription for a disease state sufficient? All of those considerations about what's going to be needed, that work can be very heavy lift for the patients in a virtual setting when they need to prepare all that on their own. So just one example that I wanted to call out here on our consideration slide about thinking through thoroughly so that we are trying to ease the experience for our patients. And if you'd like to move to our next slide, We have here depicted a hypothetical hybrid design, which shows varying touch points for the patients on the roadmap here, where we are considering having known patients in a database that is known to us, as well as doing community outreach and digital advertising, and the goal to ultimately have a consistent experience for all patients. You can see here we've also incorporated where there might be an e-consent platform or process in place, and or a mobile home nursing visit may be required later in the phase. And our goal here is to show both the patient and the study team technology platforms. When we're talking about the patient experience in a virtual trial, it is very unique. And I would say that walking through this process as a mock patient would be a really good step to take, even before the systems are all set up, and just once they are set up, being able to test that through and see for yourself what are the time delays in the communications that we're receiving. Is the information clear? Are we missing a prompt to remind someone which system to log into, or whether we're going to call them or they need to log in? So all of that work can help us better prepare and plan for what the patients and potentially their caregivers will be experiencing in their journey with us. And then looking at the technology platforms, obviously we need to identify which systems are needed in advance. They all may integrate differently and need to be configured differently. And so with that, I will turn it over to Jackie to go through our technology a little bit more in detail.
Great, thanks, Leslie. If you move to the next slide. As we all know, our industry has a vast amount of technology solutions to support clinical trials. We know that they solve a lot of disparate use cases, so each study has a complex ecosystem, which really creates different challenges for patients and study teams. It's been a pain point in traditional trials, but also creates even more friction in optimized trials. As Leslie just mentioned, optimized trials deploy a team approach to intersect the patient at the right time in the right setting. So given that complex deployment of a virtual team, technology needs are a little bit different. Do you know any solutions that holistically optimize study team conduct? Sure, tech has really improved for direct-to-patient and siteless studies, but most still don't power teams, the whole team, in an optimized way. So I'll highlight some specific challenges we've seen on the trials that we've run in our experience. First, many of the solutions do not enable single data entry or streamlined workflows. For example, we experienced a study where a sponsor chose 4 great different recruiting vendors, which provided a lot of value on the study, but our virtual teams had to log into each different system to track progress while still having to track their own eSource and EDC too. The technology didn't consider how patients will also hand off for medical records review, as Leslie pointed out. So this clunkiness really can cause some delays in patient eligibility confirmation. A second example is ensuring we collect the right data at the right time, but it's not just about the data used for evaluations. In virtual trials, it's really important to document every step, such as a sub-I and virtual team documenting more, so central PIs can really properly oversee study conduct. Most solutions we've seen fall short in this data collection for what I'll call activity progress. So this can cause some monitoring visit findings and audit issues, and Dr. Holmes will dig in a little bit more when we talk through our audit experience. And third, let's be honest, most of our solutions are not considering the user experience very well. We still know that there's a lot of rough experience with logins. We're trying SSO to solve world peace on this topic, but not quite there yet. Many don't consider the actual user workflow either. Most leave the teams to navigate lots of different tech support with disparate vendors. We had one study that required our virtual team to help a patient with a deployed patient platform, but the team didn't actually have access to help the patient through that system. We also had another trial where EDC's limited configuration wouldn't allow an efficient sign-off experience for our PIs overseeing multiple sub-Is. So they're just some examples and challenges specifically that we've seen in the existing technology deployed in these models. When frustrated teams wind up spending 1 to 2 extra hours per visit to manage those tech and data requirements, we all know they're not focused on enrolling and keeping patients on the study. Worse, we don't even compensate sites and physicians for all this extra burden, and sometimes even the patient stipend doesn't consider it. We've even had some of our network physicians state that they appreciate their EHR systems more now that they've seen the headaches with clinical trial systems. But we've also had some positive experience. We had an innovative sponsor who took the definition of optimized trials really to heart. They used Elligo's eSource and study orchestration system, and we delivered their study data from source instead of deploying an EDC. In order to really enable the virtual study teams to work efficiently, we integrated with the sponsor's selected recruitment vendor to really streamline those handoffs of the patient experience and touch points. It really was a one-stop platform that orchestrated the workflow for everyone to perform their delegated task and really let them focus on patient visit completion and quality source data as we really tried to automate everything else. It ultimately orchestrated the right data at the right time in the right setting for over 20,000 patients. The study completed on time and the sponsor received FDA approval on their submission. So if you move to the next slide, with all that experience, we compiled some key considerations for you to think about when selecting technology when running optimized trials. First, focus on how all those virtual study team players will work together to achieve the study goals, especially how those handoff activities happen to complete a patient touch point. Consider configuration and as much real-time alerting you can do so people know when they're up next in the workflow. Consider the user satisfaction, remove barriers for them. Always consider accessibility, as many patients and virtual teams won't have the same technological capabilities or connectivity to the solution. As we keep saying, collect data within the patient and study journey. Ensure you collect the right data at the right time and perhaps in a just-in-time manner. Don't collect data you won't use and automate progress data. I always like to say, surely I think we can report enrollment progress without asking a coordinator to send an enrollment log. Consider how you'll collect the right medical records for the study, like Leslie mentioned. Many times medical records can either be too limited or too vast for what the study needs. So collecting more data sometimes can cause more issues too. Ensure those audit trails aren't just for the data, but also that activity completion. As stated by my colleagues, optimized trials often take a lot of pivots as the team learns what's working and not working well. So make sure your technology can also easily pivot. Ensure those solutions have agility and consider the burden of retraining on teams as those technology configurations may change. Of course, I am a firm believer that not everything is the technology's fault. We have some great options in the market, but we certainly have an opportunity to consider selecting streamlined solutions, integrating data, and configuring them for an optimal study conduct. It may require some more upfront work than we're used to, but it really unblocks and powers the engine of the team during the study. We also think AI will help optimize trials in some use cases. I hope they include things like smarter workflows, automated documentation, streamlined patient support, and maybe that just-in-time data available for a team member to fulfill their part of the journey. Hopefully we can collaborate on next X Talks webinar, maybe on this topic. So now I'll hand to Dr. Holmes.
Thanks so much, Jackie. So we want to look at now is the elements of PI oversight and the centralized services. So if we can move to the next slide, this just visually demonstrates what we're talking about. I think one of the important things to realize is when we're looking at bringing solutions in this decentralized model, what we're really wanting to do is collaborate with sponsors and CROs to bring the number of patients that you're needing to be enrolled in your trial, as opposed to it being just a specific, let's pick and choose a number of sites. So we try to bring a solution that speaks to what are the number of folks that you need in your trial and bring that access and the efficiencies and the agility that we've talked about. But how do you actually operationalize this? And that's what I want to talk about. So in these models, there's a centralized team where there's a central PI, there are project managers, there are project management specialists. You may need different elements that Leslie has talked to with the patient engagement. And then depending on the size of the trial, you may need additional central sub-Is as well. And what that centralized team is doing is providing a single point of contact for contracting and budgeting for all of the locations of the participants. You're having a central regulatory team for document collection, IRB submissions throughout the course of the study, as well as at the beginning. And so from the study start all the way through study conduct and the end, you have that centralized team that provides those efficiencies. And a lot of that is facilitated through the electronic platforms, the electronic investigator site file, which are really vital to being able to do this. It also allows an ability for monitoring to be done remotely. And on the same platforms, you can access the ability to monitor all of the patients, and if it's a hybrid model, across all of the sites within a single platform. Another thing that's really important is when we're working with a sponsor, CRO, and there's the decision made to work in one of these little more novel models, it is really vital that communication from the teams who are making the decision to work with us in this way, that it's communicated in that and cascaded down to the actual operational teams so that we can all start out on the same page. So now let's look next at the two specific varieties that we want to address here in the decentralized model. So the first one is the virtual model. If we can go to that next slide. So in the virtual model, what we're talking about here is a completely siteless. There are no brick and mortar sites. In these kind of studies, you have the central PI. Depending on the size of the study, you may have more than one central sub-I. And it can be, patients can be brought in either through the recruiting efforts that Leslie has talked about, through some of the Elligo platforms, or it can be, for instance, one study we did where the sponsor themselves had a testing platform that was a diagnostic COVID. Patients were identified in that way, brought in and consented, and then handed over to our centralized teams to facilitate having the in-home assessments, having in-home blood draws, and all of this was done through a centralized PI oversight. So the PIs have that 24/7 availability, dealing with AEs, interacting directly with participants all over the country. Another example of this virtual model, one sponsor we worked with where we actually worked through their entire program, from the pilot study, the analytical validation, and ultimately their pivotal study, which has now had FDA approval. And one interesting thing in that, in the analytical validation study, there was one particular cohort that was found to be difficult to identify through the decentralized siteless model. So we were able to pivot and bring in one of our known sites where we knew we could find those particular patients in the cohort and include those in the study. And so that agility to be able to go from a completely siteless to bring in that hybrid. So let's talk more specifically about the hybrid model, where we've conducted a number of studies in that model. In that particular model, there's a central principal investigator, and then you may have some central sub-investigators to help with that oversight. But then out at brick and mortar sites, you have local investigators who are the sub-Is. So you can think of it as satellite sites. One of the things that this addresses is if you're really trying to get to patient access, and you may have patients at locations where there are physicians who don't have as much experience with clinical research, but they do have that physician-patient relationship such that it will augment not only recruitment, but specifically retention in a study. So you can leverage that patient access through the physician-patient relationship with the sites, while at the same time leveraging the clinical trial experience of the central principal investigator in order to ensure that you're really providing a robust quality on your study. Some of the other efficiencies that we see are an example, a study that was operationalized in this way had 27 sites. Enrolled a little over 6,000 participants in the study. And when it came time for data lock, we had a date that we were targeting, and I was able to sign off on all of the case books within a day. Fortunately, they did have a bulk sign off, which I was very appreciative of by the different sites. As you know, there are always stragglers that have to be unlocked, re-signed, but we were able to, over the next week or two, turn all of those around in less than a business day. So rather than having to chase down 27 different PIs to get casebooks signed off, that created some efficiencies that the sponsor really appreciated. The other thing is the monitoring visits. Monitoring visits are conducted using the electronic platforms. But as a central PI, we would attend the monitoring visits along with the local investigators. And sometimes we're able to identify some different patterns that when you have that many sites, sometimes there are even different monitors at some of the different sites. And sometimes we were able to communicate some things between the monitors that they found helpful as well as they were doing their visits. The other thing that we found, and an example is a study where we're the third highest enrolling across the sites, and that's all of the Elligo sites combined. But that was one of 9 total sites, some of which were large academic centers, large hospital-based health systems. And month over month, we had a fraction of the outstanding queries as compared to all of the other sites. And that has to do with that level of oversight that happens in this kind of a model. But one of the things that I want to make sure I point out that sometimes is a question, none of this oversight and centralized services precludes in any way direct interaction of the sponsor, the monitors, the medical monitors with the sites themselves. So let's look a little bit more at just how PI oversight happens. And it's the processes, the technology, and the people. So it really is important that all of this be underpinned by robust SOPs that not only support the models, but that we're accountable to, and that you have QA and regulatory folks that understand the model and the requirements. Because just because it's decentralized doesn't mean it has any less robustness to the regulatory requirements. But sometimes there are additional logistical things that you have to go through to make sure that you're meeting them in this model. Having an operational manual from the very beginning, so everybody very specifically knows the workflows, who's responsible for what, and paying very careful attention to the delegation of authority logs. Having these platforms that Jackie's talked about earlier that support visibility across all of the sites to AEs, any protocol deviations that arise, and the ability to actually go in and review each visit on the schedule of events across your sites. But then there is also that more personal touch that is really required to truly have oversight, and that has to do with the ability when you're choosing your sites for the PI to be a part of that feasibility, the vetting of the sites that are then presented to the sponsors to sign off on ultimately, and reviewing specifically credentials, having regular cadence of visits throughout the study. So let's look now. We're gonna go to an example. I'm not gonna spend a lot of time on the call here to go through this, but this was an interventional study that was operationalized in the hybrid model that was very fast enrolling. Again, I'm not going to take the time. I know you guys will all get the slides to review this, but it was one that really demonstrated all the things that we've been talking about. So I want to move now specifically to talk about the FDA audit that we had an opportunity, it's about a month ago, to be a part of. And as a part of that, the specific trial that we're talking about was a colorectal cancer diagnostic study, whereby the study was layered in on standard of care screening colonoscopy. We did this in a hybrid model across 32 sites. There was a single on-site visit and follow up with medical records release for the colonoscopy and pathology results. There, at the time of the on-site visit, blood collection and dispensing of a kit that the participants took home, and then did collection and was sent in. And so want to look at the things that the FDA inspector was really looking at, the conversations that we had around that. If we can go to the next slide, and it really did concentrate in really 3 different areas. One, as with any study, the PI oversight, and then also the decision making around the strategy for going with a hybrid or DCT trial. And then the other thing that really was an interesting part of the conversations really had to do with feedback on the importance that the FDA is placing on development towards decentralized models. And one of the comments was that it was thrilling to be able to review in a single study at a single quote unquote site charts where people were at very disparate areas all across the country, in remote areas and places where people would not normally have access to clinical research. And this really is a focus of the FDA, and it was something that they were really glad to see that this is being operationalized and people are really working towards coming up with good solutions. So for the central PI oversight elements, it really is a something where that documentation, and it's no different whether you're at a site or whether you're doing it in this model, but there is some additional scrutiny to doing it when your sub-I isn't down the hall, but rather maybe in another state. And so that central PI oversight and the robust documentation of that is really important. And then also making the decision about what studies are appropriate. You want to look at the risk level of that study. What are the adverse events that may be anticipated? What are the procedures that are being completed as a part of that schedule of events? Understanding as well that intersection of the study and the patient or their disease journey with the clinical trial, and understanding how you can collect appropriate data and whether or not you want to have that required data because of endpoints or not. And then the complexity of the design as well. So I want to look at some specific places, areas where the FDA was focused on our discussions. So if we can go to that next slide. So one of the biggest things was, again, documentation. And as I mentioned earlier, if I'm going down the hall and talking with one of my sub-Is, I'm not going to necessarily document that conversation. But it really is important in this model that that be the case, that there should be a very highly visible and auditable footprint in the participant record itself about the PI oversight, as well as a documentation of regular interactions and responses to findings that the PI may be noticing at sites. And then a particular attention around the whole informed consent process, if you're doing it in a decentralized manner, and the logistics that are required. For instance, if you're doing it in a virtual manner and you need to be able to deploy that updated version of an informed consent, you may need to put a day pause on the process to make sure that everything is uploaded. And then the protocol design in a way that is helping to ensure that you're alleviating a known potential for there to be some protocol deviations related to an endpoint that that is required versus a data point that really has nothing to do with the endpoint, but within standard of care is not necessarily something that's captured. And so it's really important to partner early with the sponsor, the CRO, to ensure that the protocol design is done in such a way to take these things into consideration. And then the eligibility determinations, particularly when a study design is such that you're obtaining that verbal history, but you may know that later in the study you will be collecting medical records that will speak to that. So again, that documentation, the oversight, and ensuring that you are very early engaging with the companies to be able to bring solutions in the design that will facilitate that access through a decentralized manner, but doing it in a way that we are being able to focus on the things that the FDA is asking us to focus on is important. So I want to stop there. I'm going to turn it back over to Barry now.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Holmes. And one thing I wanted to point out is these trials are so new that, the FDA auditor, I believe, Dr. Holmes, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was one of their first trials that they had, oversaw an audit of a trial design like this. So I know that was part of it. I know a lot of calls back to their colleagues about how do we actually want to oversee this, or what's the FDA stance on this. So I think that is the case.
That's exactly right. It was literally the first one the inspector had done in this model, and had known of one other co-inspector who had done a DCT. So they're definitely interested in the model.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you. I know that it was interesting to me, and I'm sure for the audience as well. So I did want to go into poll question 3. This is really, now that we've finalized, our discussion, and I know we have some time for a Q&A, but wanted to really understand, from the audience what some of your thoughts were. And I'm also, our questions are formed in a way where we also understand that everyone on the call might not be a sponsor that's looking to run a trial, but might be, a vendor or someone that has a solution that they may want to explore on future studies. So let's go ahead and go to poll question 3 just to understand a little bit more about, what you are looking for.
Yes, that's right. Thank you, Barry. This is our third and final poll question for today. This time we're asking, now that you've had a chance to hear more about optimized trials, what are your future plans for an optimized trial? And we have 3 options for you in this poll. Option 1, your current trial isn't enrolling and looking for other options. Option 2, you have a trial in the planning stage and you'd like to optimize the design. Or option 3, your organization already has a service or a technology offering that could support future trials. And I'll leave the poll open a little while longer here to allow the majority of the audience to get their votes in. Again, we're just looking to get a sense of what your future plans might be for an optimized trial. Again, hopefully it applies to you. And the options here are as follows. Option 1, your current trial isn't enrolling and it's looking for other options. Option 2, you have a trial in the planning stage and you're hoping to optimize the design. Or option 3, your organization already has a service or a technology offering that could support future trials. Leave the poll open a little while longer to allow a majority of the audience to vote, to get their votes in. We'll go about 10 more seconds here, so if you haven't voted yet, and if this poll question as it applies to you, make sure to get a vote in. Going to go ahead and close the poll now, and let's take a quick look at these results. So we've got 8% here saying that their current trial isn't enrolling and looking for other options. 17% currently with the trial in the planning stage and hoping to optimize the design. And our majority here, 75%, saying that the organization already has a service or technology offering that could support future trials. So Barry, I'm going to send things back to you.
Yeah, well, thank you all for that. And not surprised there either. I think any conference that you go to today, there's so many solutions and new tech and new offerings that are out there that, I think everyone sees this being an area that will be growing, in the industry of running different types of designs. And, glad to see there's a lot of folks that are on this call that might have solutions and things in the future that we might be able to integrate into our studies. So I think that's great. So I think with that, we've got about 10 minutes for Q&A. So Corey, we'll turn it back over to you and we can start walking through. I assume it's you or it might be Alyssa, so whatever way we want to go.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you, Barry, and thank you all for that excellent presentation. I'll just wait to allow everyone to get back up on screen. Here you all are, fantastic. So we do have some time left for our question and answer period of the presentation. As we do so, I invite the audience to continue sending your questions or comments. If you're attending via GoToWebinar, please use the questions window. And for those of you watching on LinkedIn Live events, please feel free to post your questions in the comments section. We already have received quite a few that have come throughout the presentation here today. So we'll get through as many as we can with the time that we have left. First question that's come in here from the audience, and probably best, I think, suited for Jackie to answer this one. This audience member was saying that it's interesting that you say data should be collected at the right time, but also that workflow is a critical consideration. Can you maybe elaborate on that distinction and that relationship there?
Sure. As everybody already presented, we're all saying optimized trials really need that different operational and data management plan. So I keep repeating, it really requires collaboration from sponsors with the virtual and PIs up front, as Dr. Holmes pointed out too in that design. We know sponsors are going to drive the data endpoints needed for their study, but oftentimes we forget about what that virtual team or the PIs need really to do as patient care. So as she also pointed out from our audit experience, it's really important to document the data, specific activities to ensure audit readiness pretty much throughout that study conduct. So again, ideally, we think that this is a collaborative effort where you map out the patient journey first, as Leslie pointed out, and map out all those touch points, who's doing what, who's delegated, and really then let the data management plan with just in time and collecting the right data at the right time is considered part of that workflow and that plan. So all stakeholders are considered. We think that's what truly optimized means, back to Barry's point on the definition as well. So that gives a little bit more perspective of how we think like the workflow and the data collection merge together.
Great, excellent. Thank you for that. Another question in here that's coming from the audience, probably best suited for Leslie to take this one. This audience member was asking about which strategy have you found to be the most effective for enrolling underrepresented patients?
Great, thank you. Yeah, for us, we have definitely seen this work best in our hybrid approach and being able to maximize on the relationships that exist with the physicians. And we can take that into the virtual setting as well by having communications be tailored from the doctors that they know and that are involved in this study, or from their local community advocacy group that has agreed to partner on this project. So I think that being able to find places for the relationships that exist and building on that trust would be the best approach moving forward.
Great, excellent, thank you. I think we have time to hit a few more questions here. This one that's come in, Dr. Holmes, probably best suited for you. And I think you touched upon some elements of this question, but maybe we could kind of clarify here. For that central PI hybrid model, are the local PIs part of the same institution as the PI and that second layer of sub-Is, or are the local PIs individual and smaller physician offices? What's the breakdown there?
Yeah, the breakdown is actually the latter. So for instance, as a central PI, I'm based in Austin, Texas, and the local sub-Is are physicians who are in mostly small practices, small, medium-sized practices, and they were located literally all across the US. You know, there were some other ones in Texas, but California, Florida, Chicago, you know, it literally all across the US as sub-Is. And then some of the central sub-Is were also remote in some of these different regional areas. But yeah, it was very disparate across the country.
Great, excellent, thank you. Gonna jump back here to, I think this one's probably best suited for Leslie. This audience member was saying that it's interesting that when you were speaking earlier, you used engagement in place where this audience member expected enrollment to be. They're just wondering about, should engagement occur more upstream from recruitment for certain groups? I would imagine it's, there's
Right.
probably an interesting way to work through that distinction there.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. It may have been on the slide where I was talking through our tools and strategies and talking about recruitment to engagement to retention. And I definitely agree. Earlier engagement is always better. I mean, even as early, if you have the time to do patient insights and do surveying to select subpopulations to understand how comfortable are they? Are they aware of different treatment paths? What would they be more likely to respond to, so that you can incorporate that into your planning would be great. It's ideal if you have the time and the partnership to be able to do that. I think the distinction I was trying to make with calling maybe that phase engagement is that in an optimized setting, the camaraderie, rapport, connection that the patients would normally develop over time during the screening window, while they're doing follow-up assessments, during eligibility confirmation, we don't have the luxury of that in-person touch anymore. And so looking at ways to keep the patients engaged during that period of time before they actually get to their randomization or enrollment visit virtually is probably why I use that term, but maybe even engagement that should be underlying the whole visual during that enrollment phase. I hope that helps answer the question.
Yeah, great, thank you. Yeah, hopefully that helps clarify to our audience member who asked that question. Jumping back to Jackie for this next question that's come in from the audience. This member was just wondering if you have any specific technologies that you've used that you feel helped ease the burden on the sites. Maybe you could give us some examples from that perspective.
Well, I have to say ours. So we've, one of the reasons we actually built a proprietary platform was sort of solve, the problem of reducing burden for site staff. That was actually on traditional trials, was our mission there. But we really saw and have been able to use that platform and configure it in manners that really help us execute easily the optimized trial. So I have to say that one. I think some of the recruiting platforms I think are especially good, especially when they're open to integrating and feeding data between we've recruited a patient and then feeding it into the virtual teams so they don't have to duplicate data entry. I think some of the e-consent and kind of telehealth capabilities have really done a better job and have a nice experience, not only for the patients, but the virtual teams. But I guess overall though, it's, in my opinion, it's just best for us to look at the whole ecosystem and try not to pick technology solutions that duplicate data collection when we already had a process or system that collected the data elsewhere. I know that's not always easy. That's like not a perfect science, but really trying to reduce the duplicate tracking is key, in my opinion, so the engine keeps moving along. I don't know. I know they threw that question to me, but Dr. Holmes, you might also have some direct experience that you would add to some that worked really well, or at least had that ease of burden, except of course our own.
Yeah, I mean, for facilitating PI oversight, our own, obviously, but there are some that I've seen come out now where they are trying to create that a platform where it's a single sign-on where we can access both, the EDC, the study training, accessing the LOBs, accessing reviewing the SUSARs and entering the SAEs. And there's one that I've seen on a couple of studies lately. So those kinds of platforms can really, really be helpful with decrease the site burden for sure.
Okay, great, excellent. Thank you so much. We did have a couple more questions come in from the audience, but unfortunately we have run out of time here. To our audience members, we couldn't attend to your questions, or if you have any further questions, or if you're someone who's watching the recording of this webinar, you can get in touch with the team at Elligo Health Research using the contact info I'm currently putting up on screen there, and they'll have a chance to follow up with you after the webinar. I do thank everyone once again for participating today. Please don't forget to download the supporting material PDFs in the handouts module. There's 2 documents there from the Elligo team that are great pieces to take away from the webinar today. I've also added a link to the chat box where you'll be able to view the recording recording of this event, and you'll also be receiving a follow-up email from X-Talks that will provide access to this recording. You can share this link with your colleagues so that they may register to view it as well. For those of you who are watching on our LinkedIn Live event, we encourage you to visit xtalks.com to register for this event to gain access to features such as viewing this recording, attending other X-Talks webinars, and more. As we wrap things up here, please note that a survey window will appear on your screen. Your participation in the survey is always appreciated, as it does help us to improve our webinars. Now, please join me once again in thanking our speakers for their excellent presentation. Barry, Leslie, Jackie, Dr. Holmes, really appreciate your time here today. We hope you all found this webinar informative, and we wish you all a great rest of your day. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.